Pakistan had all things going against it, all throughout since it was formed in 1947, and skipping all else, fast forward to 2020, when COVID got him ill-prepared, just as badly any could be. Pakistan has thus become a failure, as a combined result of combat, lack of any peace and just random mismanagement. As a classic example, they have never had a prime minister that has ever completed a full term. Now, let's start with Pakistan with the Chinese debt trap, lurking or already in motion.
Similarly, the tourism industry of Pakistan collapsed, foreign investment started fading away, and many other sectors drastically got affected. So, by the time Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif came into power in 2013 and 2018, Pakistan was already very tight on finances. So, guess what? Here's where our dear friend shows up. And just like it did for Sri Lanka, it starts offering over generous loans for Pakistan, and specifically for this port called the Gwadar port. Now this port is very important for Pakistan because Karachi and Qasim ports are operating at near full capacity and they've got very less room for expansion. But Gwadar is set to handle 1 million tons of cargo annually with a significant industrial, oil and transportation infrastructure. Now just like Sri Lanka, since Pakistan did not have the finances to build its own port, China offered an over-generous loan for the Gwadar port. And as usual, China is doing this not to help Pakistan, but to actually take over the assets using its debt trap strategy. And as you know from the Sri Lanka episode, how does a debt trap work? Step number 1, China extends an over-generous loan to an economically weaker nation. Step number 2 is conditions, wherein China charges heavy interest and asks them to pay back in 10 to 15 years as compared to the global standards of 28 to 30 years of payback span. And lastly, the entire construction would be done by a Chinese company with Chinese workers, by which the money actually flows back to China. But on paper, the weak country owes a huge debt to China along with interest. And then comes step 3. Since the loan and interest is too much for the weak countries to pay back, China takes over the asset and uses it for its own purposes. In this case, Pakistan owes China not 1, not 2, but $24.7 billion in debt to China. And these loans are said to have an exorbitant interest rate of 4.1% as compared to global standards of just 1 to 2%. And they built not just Gwadar port, but 26 more projects in Pakistan, including solar projects, rail projects, highways, hydro projects, ports, and even fiber optic cables running from Pakistan to China. And by the way, China has already taken over the Gwadar port from Pakistan on a 40-year lease. But what blew my mind is that, in spite of the finances being in such terrible state, Imran Khan was still rolling out insane subsidies that were bleeding the coffers of the nation. But the question over here is, what the hell does China get from all of these? Well, because of these bad loans and investments, Pakistan's external debt other than China amounts to $65 billion. This is how, because of an extremely unstable government, by involving itself into the dirty business of war brokering, by getting into the jaws of a cunning dragon, and with reckless subsidies during an existing cash crunch, Pakistan is in such a pathetic state that it does not have a good reputation at the international level, it is not at all attractive for foreign companies or investors, and more importantly, it is under so much debt that IMF itself is doubtful of bailing it out. As a result, Pakistan is facing one of the worst economic crises in its history. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the lessons that we need to learn from Pakistan's failure. First lesson we need to learn from Pakistan is that no matter how much political rivalry exists between political parties inside the country, the ultimate focus of the rivalry must always be towards the development of the nation and not just about eliminating the opposition. In this case, we saw that while political parties and military entities were busy overthrowing each other, the economics of the country went for a toss. So always keep an eye on the political parties so that they don't keep reversing the good things that the previous party has done, because if that happens, it's only going to lead to destructive development. And this applies to everything from laws to tax regulations to even infrastructure projects. Lesson number 2. In geopolitics, your allies are never your friends. So choose to work for each of them very carefully, because it wouldn't take 2 seconds for them to abandon you and go against you. In this case, Pakistan unnecessarily got into the proxy war in Afghanistan, and today, while the US Army has gone back home, it has caused an irreversible damage to the reputation of Pakistan at the global level. And lastly, always be careful with Chinese products.
Yeah.